I was standing at the kitchen sink when it happened, hands deep in warm, soapy water, watching the rinse of gray daylight drape itself over the backyard. The weather had been restless all morning, at first just a soft patter on the windows, like fingers testing the glass, then a more insistent drumming that made the whole house feel smaller, more contained. It was one of those afternoons when time seems to move slower, when the world outside feels far away and your thoughts echo a little louder than usual. I had just set a bowl of rinsed berries on the counter and was reaching for a towel when I noticed a car slowing down in front of my house. I glanced up out of habit, expecting to see a delivery truck or maybe a neighbor pulling into their driveway. Instead, I recognized the familiar shape of my daughter's car easing near the curb. For a split second, I thought she'd forgotten something from the weekend, her jacket, her charger, one of the grandkids' toys. But then the driver's side door opened, and it wasn't my daughter who stepped out. It was her husband, my son-in-law, alone. No car seat door opening, no hurried rush to unbuckle a child, no second door closing behind him. It was just him. He climbed out, hunching his shoulders against the drizzle, and shut the door carefully. The rain wasn't heavy, but it was steady, a fine mist that clung to his jacket and dampened his hair. As he walked toward the house, I felt an odd flutter in my chest. He didn't usually come over unannounced. In fact, in all the years he'd been a part of our family, I couldn't remember a single time he'd shown up at my door without calling first. I dried my hands on the dish towel and moved quietly to the side of the window, peeking through the sheer curtain. He paused at the bottom of the steps for a second, as if steadying himself, then climbed up onto the porch. His posture was neat and contained, but there was something about the way he held himself. Something pulled tight, something careful. He lifted his hand and knocked, not firmly, not with the confidence of someone who felt entitled to be there. It was a soft, almost tentative knock, like a question. I opened the door. He gave me a small, tired smile, the kind that looks like it's been practiced in the mirror so it doesn't worry anyone. Up close, I could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the barely there crease in his forehead that deepened when he tried to relax it. "Hi," he said quietly, saying my name with a careful tenderness I wasn't used to hearing from him. "Do you have a few minutes? I was hoping we could talk, just the two of us." Those last words made something in my stomach drop and settle again. Just the two of us. It wasn't his words that gave me pause. It was the way he said them. Not secretive, not inappropriate, just vulnerable. Like he was asking if I had room in my day for whatever weight he'd brought with him. "Of course," I said. "Come in, you're getting soaked." He stepped inside, but even then he didn't walk in fully until I'd moved back a bit and nodded like he needed reassurance that he was truly welcome. I shut the door behind him, and the gentle thrum of the rain outside turned into a muffled hum. He stood in the entryway, brushing a few droplets from his sleeves, glancing around as if looking for his bearings in a place he'd been dozens of times before. "Can I take your jacket?" I asked. "Yeah, sure, thank you." He slipped it off and handed it to me, his movements measured, deliberate. I hung it on the hook by the door, where my daughter's coats often ended up when the whole family visited. "Tea? Coffee?" I offered, more out of instinct than anything else. "Tea would be nice," he said, his voice soft. "If it's not too much trouble." "It's no trouble at all," I replied. "Come sit in the kitchen." We walked down the short hallway together, the floor creaking faintly under our steps. The kitchen was warm and modest, lit by the soft glow of the overhead light and the muted, rainy sky coming through the window over the sink. It had always been the heart of my home, the place where serious and silly conversations both seemed to unfold more easily. I gestured to a chair at the table, and he sat down, folding his hands loosely together. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and let the familiar routine ground me. The gentle tap of metal against the burner, the soft whoosh of the flame, small sounds that made everything feel manageable. I could feel his gaze following my movements, not in an intrusive way, but in the way people stare at something steady when they're trying to keep themselves from coming apart. When I turned back to him, he offered a faint, apologetic smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," he said. "I probably should have called first." "You're not interrupting," I told him. "You're welcome here. Sit, breathe. You look like you've got a lot on your mind." He let out a short, quiet breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. Yeah, that would be accurate. The kettle began to murmur on the stove. I prepared 2 mugs, set tea bags inside, and brought them over to the table. He wrapped his hands around his mug as soon as I placed it in front of him, even though it was still empty and not yet warm. It was like he needed something to hold on to. I sat down across from him, leaving space between us, but not so much that it felt distant. The rain drummed softly in the background, a kind of steady, neutral soundtrack to whatever was about to unfold. We sat there for a few seconds, in silence. I wasn't sure who to talk to, he said finally, eyes fixed on his hands. I kept coming back to you. That's a big thing to say, I replied, keeping my tone gentle, open. Why me? He glanced up at me, then down again. You see people, he said quietly. You don't rush them. You don't make anyone feel stupid for feeling what they feel. I needed that. For a moment, I didn't trust myself to speak. It had been a long time since anyone had described me that way. Since my divorce, I'd grown accustomed to being the quiet presence in the room, the one who listened, who cooked, who smiled politely, but not often the one someone chose as their safe place. The kettle whistled softly from the stove, saving me from needing to answer right away. I got up, poured the hot water into our mugs, and brought them back to the table. Steam curled up between us, a delicate veil that made everything feel a little softer, a little calmer. He watched the tea steep, then looked up again. I don't really need advice, he said. I guess I just need to say things out loud to someone who won't judge me or turn it into something about them. All right, I said, then I'll just listen, and we'll see where it goes. He nodded gratefully, took a quiet breath, and began. At first, his words came slowly, as if he was testing each one before letting it go. He talked about work, about the way responsibilities had multiplied over the last few years, how expectations had shifted so gradually that he hadn't noticed he was drowning until he was already under. He spoke about pressure, not the loud kind that shouts in your ear, but the quiet sort that sits on your chest and wakes you up at 3 a.m. with no obvious reason. He made sure to say, more than once, that it wasn't my daughter he was overwhelmed by. He said it gently, carefully, clearly, and I believed him. He spoke of her with warmth and love, and a kind of protectiveness that made my heart soften. But even love, even good, solid love, can't always silence everything else going on inside a person. I feel like I'm always trying to keep things together, he said, at work, at home, in the family, and I don't know when that became my entire identity, the one who just handles it. I nodded, understanding more than he knew. And where are you in all of that? I asked softly. He glanced at me, then scoffed lightly, not at me, but at the question itself. That's kind of the problem, I don't know. He held the mug nearer to his face, but didn't drink. The steam brushed his cheeks, fogging the edge of his glasses. His fingers trembled just a little, not enough that someone across a crowded table would notice, but from where I sat, I saw it clearly. I saw how much effort he was using just to stay composed. It's strange, he continued. Everyone thinks I'm fine, my coworkers, my friends, even my parents. I'm the reliable one, the easy one. And I've spent so long being that, I don't know how to be anything else without feeling like I'm letting everyone down. You know, I said slowly, people like you, people who seem steady, sometimes become invisible in their own lives. Others get so used to leaning on you, they forget to ask if you need to lean on someone too. He stared at me for a moment, and his eyes shone with something that looked like relief. That's exactly it, he said quietly. I didn't think anyone noticed that. I do, I replied. I've been that person. A faint smile touched his lips then, the first real one I'd seen on his face since he'd arrived. The kitchen felt warmer, somehow, not because of the tea or the oven or the lights, but because something had shifted between us, gently, respectfully. There was no tension, no impropriety, just the recognition of 2 people from different corners of the family who understood what it meant to carry things quietly. He hesitated, then cleared his throat. There's something else, he said, lowering his gaze again. Something I've been afraid to say. The rain outside seemed to blur into a softer murmur, like the world was making space for this moment. I didn't rush him. All right, I said, we're here, say it however you need to. He took a breath, then another, and then he looked at me with an expression so open and unguarded that it stirred something protective inside me. I feel alone, he said simply, even when I'm surrounded by people, even when I'm sitting at a crowded table. I feel like no one really sees what's going on in my head. And it scares me, because I'm not supposed to feel this way. I'm supposed to be happy and grateful and fine. His voice didn't shake much, but his eyes did. Just a bit. He blinked it away. I know I have a good life, he went on quickly, as if he needed to make that clear. I love my wife, I love the kids. I love my work most days. I'm not ungrateful. But there's this emptiness sometimes, like I'm standing just outside my own life, watching myself go through the motions. I let his words hang in the air for a moment before responding. Some confessions don't need immediate answers. They need room. I don't think you're ungrateful, I said. I think you're human. And being human means you can feel more than one thing at a time. You can love your life and still feel lost inside it. That doesn't make you spoiled or selfish. It makes you honest. He swallowed, his shoulders dropping a fraction. That's what I was afraid of, he murmured. That people would say I'm being dramatic or that I don't appreciate what I have. Someone who's ungrateful doesn't worry that they're ungrateful, I replied gently. You're not asking to tear your life apart. You're asking to understand yourself better inside it. He watched me for a long second, his expression softening. That's why I came here, he admitted. Because you don't seem to need everything sugar-coated, and you don't overreact. I knew if I told you all this, you'd just let it be what it is without twisting it into something else. I'm glad you did come, I said. It's a compliment, you know, to be trusted like that. He looked down at his tea, finally lifting the mug to take a cautious sip. The tension in his hands eased just a little. I also came because of something else, he said after a moment. Something I wasn't sure how to word. He paused, searching for the right approach. When I'm here, he continued, in this house, in this kitchen, I feel calm. I don't know why. I just do. It's like the noise in my head turns down a few notches. That's what a home should feel like, I said, even if it's not your own house. Sometimes we borrow that feeling from other places when we need it. He smiled faintly. I guess that's what I'm doing. There was another pause, softer this time. Not the heavy kind, but the thoughtful kind. I admire you, he said suddenly in a quiet, careful tone, not in a way that crosses any lines. I want to be very clear about that. I just admire how you carry yourself. You've been through a lot, but you don't make it other people's problem. You're strong without needing to prove it. Being around you makes me feel like I'm allowed to just be honest. His words landed gently, but they carried weight. There was nothing inappropriate in them. Only deep respect and a kind of emotional trust I hadn't experienced in a long time. I'm not sure I'm always as strong as I look, I said, my lips curving into a small, wry smile. But I've had practice. When you live long enough, you collect a few rough seasons. I know about some of them, he replied quietly. The divorce, the adjustments afterward, the way you rebuilt your routines. My wife talks about you, you know, about how you always managed to keep some kind of peace, even when you must have been a mess inside. I don't think you give yourself enough credit. I looked away for a moment, surprised by the unexpected sting of tears at the corners of my eyes. I blinked them back quickly. The compliment wasn't loud or dramatic, but it touched something tender in me, a part I'd long ago wrapped in layers of practicality. Thank you, I said simply. That means more than you might realize. He nodded, then let out a long, steadying breath. I've been feeling disconnected from myself, he admitted, like I've drifted away from the version of me I actually like, the one who had hobbies and curiosity and space. Lately, I feel like I'm just a role, husband, father, employee, provider. I don't remember the last time I felt like a whole person. I sat with that for a moment before I answered. When you're around people who see you, I said slowly, it can remind you that you're more than the roles you play. Maybe that's what's happening here. Maybe you're not feeling something new. You're remembering something old. He looked at me with quiet gratitude. That's exactly it, he said. Being here, talking to you, I feel a little closer to the person I used to be. The one who wasn't afraid to admit when he was tired or confused. The one who could say, I don't know what I'm doing, and not feel like a failure. You're not a failure, I told him firmly. You're just at a crossroad. Those feel scary, but they're not the end of the road. They're a chance to choose more consciously how you want to live. He exhaled slowly. I want to make some changes, he said. Real changes, not dramatic ones, just internal changes. I want to stop living on autopilot. I want to feel present again, but I'm not sure how to start. You start, I replied, by doing exactly what you're doing right now. You stop pretending you're fine when you're not. You talk. You ask for help. You let yourself be human instead of a machine. You don't do it all privately in your head. He watched me with a new kind of intensity, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, searching. Would you, he began, then hesitated. Would you be willing to talk like this sometimes? Not all the time, not every week, just every now and then. When I feel like I'm losing my footing, not as a therapist, just as you, the way you are now. I took a moment before responding. I wanted to be careful, not just for him, but for myself and for our family. Lines mattered, roles mattered, but so did support, and I trusted myself to know the difference between healthy connection and dangerous entanglement. Yes, I said finally, as long as we stay honest and respectful with each other and with your marriage. If talking here helps you breathe a little easier, I'm willing. The relief on his face was immediate and obvious, like a weight sliding off his shoulders. Thank you, he whispered. I didn't want to keep carrying all this around alone. You're not meant to, I replied. No one is. We sat quietly for a while after that. The rain outside had softened into a fine mist, and the light coming through the window had shifted from dull gray to a gentler, silvery tone. It made the kitchen look softer, almost like a memory. He lifted his mug again and took a longer sip this time, the tension in his jaw relaxing bit by bit. There's one more thing, he said eventually, looking at me with a kind of cautious honesty. I want to say it clearly so there's no misunderstanding. All right, I said, go ahead. I respect you, he said, deeply. I respect my wife. I respect our family. I didn't come here because I was looking for something outside my marriage. I came here because I needed a different kind of support than I could ask her for right now. I never want you to think I'm trying to cross a line or attach feelings to this that don't belong here. I felt a slow warmth spread through my chest at his careful, deliberate choice of words. I'm glad you said that out loud, I replied. For both our sakes. And I believe you. What I hear in you isn't someone running away from his life, but someone trying to learn how to live it more honestly. That's something I can support. He nodded, shoulders loosening a little more. You didn't push me away, he said quietly. You didn't tell me to man up or keep it to myself. You made room for this conversation. I don't know how to explain it, but that means a lot. We all need someone to make room for us, I answered. At any age, you'd be surprised how many grown adults walk around never having had a real conversation like this in their lives. He sat with that for a moment, then let out a soft sigh. I don't want to become hardened, he admitted. I see people my age, older than me, who just shut down. They stop asking questions. They stop reflecting. They stop trying to understand themselves. I don't want to end up like that. You won't, I said, as long as you keep doing what you're doing today. People don't grow distant from themselves overnight. It happens when they stop listening, little by little. You're doing the opposite. You're listening more closely. He smiled faintly, his gaze drifting around the kitchen. His eyes lingered on the little things. The chipped mug on the counter, the faded photograph on the fridge, the plant by the window leaning toward the light. This house feels like it remembers things, he said quietly. Not just events, feelings. Laughing, crying, talking. It feels like a place where it's okay to be real. That's what I always wanted it to be, I replied. Even when my life fell apart, I wanted this space to feel safe. Maybe that's why you feel what you feel here. The walls have heard more truths than you'd imagine. He chuckled softly. Then I guess I've just added mine to the list. We talked a little longer after that, more casually. He told me a few stories from work, small frustrations and small victories. I shared a bit about the early years of my marriage, about how I'd once also believed that being the strong one was the only way to deserve love. It was a conversation that wandered but never felt aimless. It flowed naturally from one topic to another, bound together by the thread of quiet honesty. Eventually, he glanced at the clock on the wall and sighed. "I should go soon," he said. "I promised I'd be back in time for dinner." "Of course," I replied. "They'll be wondering where you disappeared to." He winced a little, then smiled. "I told my wife I needed to clear my head. I just didn't say exactly how. I think, when I'm ready, I'll tell her I talked to you. Not every detail, but I want her to know I'm trying to understand myself better, not just brooding." "That sounds fair," I said. "Honesty doesn't always mean sharing every single word, but it does mean being truthful about the big things." He nodded slowly. "I think I can do that." We both stood up. He pushed his chair in quietly, as if worried the scrape of wood on tile might break whatever delicate peace had settled over the room. We walked together down the hallway toward the front door. When I opened it, a cool, damp breeze drifted in, carrying with it the scent of wet pavement and the faint promise that the rain would soon be over. The clouds were starting to thin in patches, letting pale light spill through in broken pieces. He stepped out onto the porch, then turned back to me. "You helped me find something today," he said. "Not all the answers. I don't think anyone can give me that. But direction, a starting point. I haven't had that in a while." "Direction is more useful than answers sometimes," I replied. "Answers can change. Direction just needs to be honest." He held my gaze for a moment, his expression open, grateful. "I'm going to try," he said, "to be more real, to let people see me even when I'm not the easy one. It scares me, but not as much as staying the way I've been." "That's growth," I said gently, "and growth rarely feels comfortable." He gave a small, genuine smile. "You really are good at this," he said. "At what?" I asked. "At making the hard stuff sound possible." I laughed softly. "That's just age," I replied. "I've lived long enough to see that even the hardest seasons eventually become stories we tell. You're in the middle of one of yours. But it doesn't have to define you forever." He nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. "I'll call next time," he said, "before I show up out of the blue." "You can," I replied, "but you're also allowed to knock on this door when you need to. Just remember the boundaries we talked about. Honesty, respect, no secrets that would hurt the people we love." "Deal," he said. "Honesty and respect." He walked down the steps and onto the path, his posture noticeably different from when he'd arrived. His shoulders were still carrying plenty, I could tell, but there was a new steadiness in the way he moved, a sense that he wasn't completely alone inside his mind anymore. I watched him get into the car, start the engine, and pull away from the curb. The taillights glowed faintly red against the damp street as he drove off. When his car disappeared around the corner, the quiet of the house folded back around me, but it didn't feel heavy. I closed the door, then wandered back to the kitchen. The 2 mugs were still sitting on the table. A faint ring of tea circled the bottom of one. The other had cooled untouched after the first few sips. I picked his up, feeling the cool ceramic against my palm, and for a moment I just stood there, thinking about the conversation that had just taken place in this small, ordinary room. I thought about how many years I'd spent believing my days of being truly needed were behind me. After my marriage ended and the children grew up, my life had gradually settled into a quiet rhythm. I cooked, I cleaned, I visited the grandchildren. I answered polite questions from acquaintances and gave polite answers in return. It was a life of soft obligations and quiet routines. But that afternoon had been different. Someone had come to me not for a recipe, not for a favor, not for a holiday plan, but for understanding, for a kind of guidance that had nothing to do with fixing things and everything to do with being present, while another human being peeled back the layers of their own heart. It stirred something in me I hadn't realized had gone dormant, a sense of purpose, a reminder that my years had not just passed, they had earned me something: experience, perspective, the ability to sit calmly with someone else's storm and not be swept away. I washed the mugs, wiped the table, and glanced out the window. The sky was lighter now, the rain reduced to the occasional drop sliding down the glass. The world looked washed, rinsed clean of the morning's heaviness. As I stood there, I realized that this conversation had changed more than just his day. It had shifted something in mine as well. It had reminded me that connections can be formed in the most unexpected pairings, between a woman in her later years and the man who married her daughter. Not through gossip or conflict, not through blurred lines or dangerous emotions, but through honesty, respect, and a shared admission that being human is complicated at every age. He had come to my door with the weight of quiet loneliness, an unspoken disappointment in himself. He had left with a little more clarity, a little more direction, and the knowledge that there was at least one place in the world where he could sit down, wrap his hands around a warm mug, and tell the truth without being shamed for it. And I, who had spent so long believing that my story had already reached its quieter chapters, had been reminded of something important, that my life was still intersecting with other lives in ways that mattered, that my presence still had the power to steady someone else's steps, that even in the stillness of an ordinary afternoon, when the rain tapped against the window panes and the kettle hummed on the stove, something quietly significant could take root around a kitchen table. I didn't know exactly what his next steps would be. I didn't know how quickly he would talk to my daughter, or what changes he would make in his routines, or how many more quiet visits we might share in the months ahead. But I knew one thing with a certainty that settled warmly in my chest. He was no longer trying to carry everything alone, and I was no longer sitting in this house believing I had nothing left to offer. We had both, in our own ways, taken a small step back toward ourselves that day. And although the world outside my window went on as usual, cars passing, branches swaying, clouds shifting, inside, something had quietly realigned. Somewhere on the other side of town, I imagined him walking into his own house, greeting his family, hugging his children, kissing my daughter on the cheek. Maybe he would be a little more present at dinner. Maybe he would listen more carefully, speak a little more honestly, or allow himself an extra moment of silence before answering the usual, "How was your day?" Maybe he would sit on the edge of his bed that night and finally admit, if only to himself, that it was okay not to be the unshakable one all the time. And maybe, the next time he felt that familiar heaviness pressing against his ribs, he would remember the sound of the rain against my windows, the steam curling up from a mug between us, and the simple fact that someone, somewhere, understood. As for me, I moved through the rest of the evening with a lighter heart than I'd had in quite some time. I cooked myself a simple meal, turned on a lamp in the living room, and settled into my favorite chair. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt like a backdrop to a life that had already happened. It felt, in some small way, like a place where something new had just begun. Not a dramatic chapter, not a grand twist, just a gentle opening. An unexpected conversation on a rainy afternoon had reminded two people, one younger, one older, that no matter how much life has already unfolded, there is always room to understand ourselves more deeply, to connect more honestly, and to offer and receive the kind of presence that says, without needing to be spoken, "You are seen, you are not a burden, and you are not walking this alone."